Question 1. What is communism? Communism is the doctrine of the conditions of the liberation of the proletariat. Question 2. What is the proletariat?
The proletariat is that class in society which lives entirely from the sale of its labor and does not draw profit from any kind of capital, whose weal and woe, whose life and death, whose sole existence depends on the demand for labor.
Question 3. Proletarians, then, have not always existed. No, there have always been poor and working classes, but there have not always been workers living under these specific conditions. In other words, there have not always been proletarians, any more than there has always been free, unbridled competition. Question 4. How did the proletariat originate?
The proletariat originated in the Industrial Revolution, which took place in England in the last half of the 18th century, and which has since then been repeated in all the civilized countries of the world.
This Industrial Revolution was precipitated by the discovery of the steam engine and various spinning machines.
These machines, which were very expensive and hence could be bought only by big capitalists, altered the whole mode of production and displaced the former workers. Question 5.
Under what conditions does this sale of the labor of the proletarians to the bourgeoisie take place?
Labor is a commodity like any other, and its price is therefore determined by the same laws that apply to other commodities.
In a regime of big industry, the price of a commodity is, on the average, always equal to its cost of production. Hence, the price of labor is also equal to the cost of production of labor.
But the cost of production of labor consists of precisely the quantity of means of subsistence necessary to enable the worker to continue working and to prevent the working class from dying out.
Question 6. What working classes were there before the Industrial Revolution? In antiquity, the workers were the slaves of the owners.
In the Middle Ages, they were the serfs of the land-owning nobility.
In the cities during the Middle Ages and right up to the Industrial Revolution, there were journeymen who worked in the service of petty bourgeois masters. Question 7.
In what way do proletarians differ from slaves? The slave is sold once and for all. The proletarian must sell himself daily and hourly.
The individual slave, property of one master, is assured an existence, however wretched it may be, because of the master's interest.
The individual proletarian, property, as it were, of the entire bourgeois class, has no secured existence. The slave is outside competition. The proletarian is in it.
The slave frees himself when of all the relations of private property he abolishes only the relation of slavery. The proletarian can free himself only by abolishing private property in general.
Question 8. In what way do proletarians differ from serfs? The serf possesses and uses an instrument of production, a piece of land, in exchange for which he gives up a part of his product or part of the services of his labor. The proletarian works with the instruments of production of another for the account of this other, in exchange for a part of the product. The serf gives up, the proletarian receives. The serf is assured an existence. The proletarian is not. The serf liberates himself by either running away to the city or by driving out his lord and becoming a property owner himself.
The proletarian liberates himself by abolishing private property, competition, and all class differences. Question 9. In what way do proletarians differ from handicraftsmen?
In the old handicraft system, the apprentice and journeyman worked to become masters themselves. They were often part of the master's family.
The proletarian is almost always a wage worker for life and stands in a purely money relationship with the employer.
The handicraftsman belongs to a guild. The proletarian belongs to no such protective association and is subject to the fluctuations of the open market. Question 10.
In what way do proletarians differ from manufacturing workers?
The manufacturing worker of the 16th to the 18th century almost everywhere still owned an instrument of production, a weaving loom or a spinning wheel. The proletarian has none of these.
The manufacturing worker almost always lived in the countryside and in a more or less patriarchal relation to his landlord or employer.
The proletarian lives for the most part in the city, and his relation to his employer is purely a money relation. Question 11.
What were the immediate consequences of the Industrial Revolution and of the division of society into bourgeoisie and proletariat?
First, the lower prices of industrial products completely destroyed the old system of manufacture based on hand labor. Second, wherever big industries displaced manufacture, the bourgeoisie developed in wealth and power to the utmost and made itself the first class of the country. Third, the proletarian developed in the same proportion as the bourgeoisie, because the proletarians can only be employed by capital. Question 12. What were the further consequences of the Industrial Revolution? Big industry created in the steam engine and other machines the means of endlessly expanding industrial production.
Because of this, it soon became apparent that more was being produced than could be consumed. This resulted in a commercial crisis. Factories were closed, owners went bankrupt, and the workers were without bread.
After a time, the products were sold, and business improved, only to lead once again to overproduction and another crisis. Question 13. What follows from these periodic commercial crises?
It follows that big industry has outgrown the stage in which it was governed by private property and competition.
A new organization of society is necessary, in which production is no longer directed by mutually competing individual factory owners, but rather by the whole of society, operating according to a definite plan and taking account of the needs of all.
Question 14. What kind of a new social order will this have to be?
Above all, it will have to take the control of industry and of all branches of production out of the hands of mutually competing individuals, and instead institute a system in which all these branches of production are operated by society as a whole.
This means that private property will also have to be abolished. Question 15. Was not the abolition of private property possible at an earlier time? No.
Every change in the social order is the necessary consequence of the creation of new forces of production, which no longer fit into the old property relations. As long as it is not possible to produce so much that there is enough for all, with more left over for the expansion of social capital, there must always be a ruling class and a poor, oppressed class. Only now, through the development of big industry, are the means available to abolish private property forever. Question 16. Will the peaceful abolition of private property be possible?
It would be desirable if this could happen, and the communists would certainly be the last to oppose it.
But the communists also see that the development of the proletariat in nearly all civilized countries has been violently suppressed, and that in this way the opponents of communism have been working toward a revolution with all their might.
If the oppressed proletariat is finally driven to revolution, then the communists will defend the interests of the proletariats with deeds, as we now defend them with words. Question 17.
Will it be possible for private property to be abolished at one stroke?
No, no more than existing forces of production can at one stroke be multiplied to the extent necessary for the creation of a communal society.
In all probability, the proletarian revolution will transform existing society gradually, and will be able to abolish private property only when the means of production are available in sufficient quantity.
Question 18. What will be the course of this revolution? First and foremost, it will establish a democratic constitution, and through this, the direct or indirect dominance of the proletariat.
The main measures will include the limitation of private property through progressive taxation and heavy inheritance taxes, the gradual expropriation of landowners, industrialists, and railroad magnates, the organization of labor on communal estates and in communal factories, the centralization of credit and banking in the hands of the state, and the education of all children in state institutions at state expense.
Question 19. Will it be possible for this revolution to take place in one country alone? No.
By creating the world market, big industry has already brought all the peoples of the earth into such close relation with one another that none is independent of what happens to the others.
Further, it has coordinated the social development of the civilized countries to such an extent that in all of them, bourgeoisie and proletariat have become the decisive classes.
It will be a worldwide revolution, and will have a worldwide terrain. Question 20. What will be the consequences of the ultimate disappearance of private property?
Society will take all forces of production and means of commerce out of the hands of private capitalists, and will manage them in accordance with a plan based on the availability of resources and the needs of the whole society.
The division of society into different, mutually hostile classes will then become unnecessary.
The division of labor, which makes one man a peasant, another a shoemaker, and a third a factory worker, will completely disappear, replaced by a system where everyone's faculties are developed in all directions.
Question 21. What will be the influence of communist society on the family?
It will transform the relations between the sexes into a purely private matter, which concerns only the persons involved, and into which society has no occasion to intervene.
It can do this since it abolishes private property and educates children on a communal basis, and in this way removes the two bases of traditional marriage, the dependence rooted in private property of the women on the men and of the children on the parents.
Question 22. What will be the attitude of communism to existing nationalities?
The nationalities of the peoples associating themselves in accordance with the principle of community will be compelled to mingle with each other as a result of this association, and thereby to dissolve themselves, just as the various class and rank differences must give way to the abolition of their basis, private property. Question 23. What will be its attitude to existing religions? All religions so far have been the expression of historical stages of development of individual peoples or groups of peoples. But communism is the stage of historical development which makes all existing religions superfluous and brings about their disappearance. Question 24. How do communists differ from socialists?
The so-called socialists are divided into three categories. First, reactionary socialists, adherents of feudal and patriarchal society which has been destroyed by big industry.
Second, bourgeois socialists, who wish to maintain the current society, but want to get rid of the evils which are an inherent part of it.
Third, democratic socialists, who favor some of the same measures the communists advocate, but not as part of the transition to communism, but rather as measures which they believe will be sufficient to abolish the misery of present-day society.
Question 25. What is the attitude of the communists to the other political parties of our time? This attitude is different in the different countries.
In England, France, and Belgium, where the bourgeoisie rules, the communists still have a common interest with the various democratic parties.
In America, where a democratic constitution has already been established, the communists must make common cause with the party which will turn this constitution against the bourgeoisie and use it in the interests of the proletariat.
In Germany, the decisive struggle between the bourgeoisie and the absolute monarchy is still to come.
Here the communists must help the bourgeoisie to power as soon as possible, in order the sooner to be able to overthrow it.